What if there was a civilization before history began? What if we are not the beginning? Not the first minds to wonder. Not the first eyes to gaze at the stars. Not the first hands to shape stone with purpose. What if, long before the desert kingdoms and the river empires, before the pharaohs and ziggurats and written scrolls, there was something else? Something older. So old that even the earth, in her slow churn of wind and tide and time, has tried to forget it. We begin not with proof, but with a pause. A quiet breath held between epochs. A sense faint as the echo of a forgotten song that something might be missing from our story. Not because we haven't looked, but because we've only searched in places where memory still clings to the walls. But the deepest memories dissolve into dust. Below the oldest temples of Egypt, beneath the layered soils of Mesopotamia, under the silent ruins we've already named, there may lie the bones of a chapter we've never read. A civilization lost not in war, not in fire, but in time itself. Not erased violently, but eroded gently. Worn away like sandstone beneath centuries of rain. Could it be possible? That we, the curious descendants of survivors, have overlooked an entire rise and fall simply because we didn't know it could exist? We often measure time with stones. With pottery shards and fossilized seeds and scratches in the bedrock. But there are ages so ancient, the stones have been folded back into the earth. Subducted by continents drifting over molten seas. Crushed into silence. Their histories rewritten as magma and mountain. How do you remember something the earth herself has chosen to forget? And still, there are whispers. Hints. Not loud enough to shout, only soft enough to haunt. A carved block found deep beneath sediment, where no carved block should be. A buried structure aligned with the stars older than the cultures we thought first understood the sky. Scattered patterns in global myths, all speaking of a great flood, a lost age, a vanished people who knew the world before it was broken. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's storytelling. But maybe it's memory. We don't need flying machines or laser tools to imagine a civilization. Not if we redefine what it means to be advanced. Perhaps they didn't leave skyscrapers, only songs. Not metal, but maps. Not engines, but energy, the kind woven into the land, written in the rocks, and then forgotten as the climate changed, the oceans rose, and the forest swallowed everything. Is it possible that Earth is a palimpsest? A manuscript written over and over, civilizations erased, then rewritten with only the faintest traces left beneath? A few ancient anomalies do not prove anything. But anomalies are not answers, they are invitations. They are doors left ajar in the dark. We do not force them open with certainty. We approach gently. Quietly. Willing to listen. Because sometimes, the most profound truths are not discovered. They are remembered. Geology tells us that we've had many Earths. Warm ones. Cold ones. Lush and barren ones. Worlds where glaciers ruled, and others where rainforests stretched to the poles. Life always returned, but not always the same. So then we ask, could intelligence, too, have returned? More than once? What if our rise is not the first flicker of brilliance in the dark, but only the latest candle to be lit in a long corridor of forgotten flames? The silence of deep time does not mean nothing happened. It only means what happened did not survive. Or perhaps, it was not meant to. If a civilization flourished tens of thousands of years ago, or even hundreds of thousands, what would remain? Not much. Not unless it etched itself into stone strong enough to withstand entropy, or buried itself beneath the seas, protected from wind and weather. But most of all, what if it didn't want to remain? What if part of being ancient is knowing how to vanish? This isn't about rewriting history books with fantasies. It's about reopening the page. Letting wonder creep in around the edges. Letting science and imagination hold hands not as opposites, but as companions. We are not searching for Atlantis. We are listening for silence. For the echo beneath the accepted story. For the possibility that time is more layered, more mysterious, more forgiving, and more forgetful than we once believed. And if we listen long enough in the quiet between tectonic breaths, in the hush of subglacial rivers, in the sleep of ancient deserts, we may feel it. Not noise. Not evidence. But presence. The presence of something that came before. And if it did, if even a trace of it remains, then perhaps this is not the first world. Not the first attempt. Not the first civilization. Just the first one to think it is. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? The stones that shouldn't exist. They rest in silence. Half buried, half broken, half forgotten. Stones carved with purpose, shaped with skill, smoothed as if by hands long vanished. And yet, their age doesn't fit. They shouldn't be here. Not this deep, not this old. Not beneath layers of sediment that predate the first known cities. And still, here they are. Some lie in deserts where the wind whispers secrets through cracks and edges. Others are deep underwater, in places where no civilization was meant to be. A block shaped too precisely. A platform aligned to the heavens. Steps worn down by feet no one remembers. These are not monuments. Not anymore. They are questions. The kind of questions that sleep beneath our certainty. That tap gently at the doors of what we think we know. Geologists trace them with uncertain fingers. Archaeologists measure them, carbon date what they can. But some stones tell no story in isotopes. They give no easy answer. Too eroded for language. Too silent for records. Too still to argue. And yet, they speak. Not in words, but in impossibilities. In Baalbek, there are megaliths too heavy to have been moved by ancient cranes. In Japan's Yanaguni, there is a structure beneath the seed terraces, right angles, steps, debated fiercely. Natural formation, or the ghost of a forgotten city? In Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, intricate pillars stand in circles, carved before agriculture even bloomed. Symbols. Animals. Geometry before the plow. Again and again, they challenge the timeline. They murmur, "Look again." But we often don't. Because they don't fit. The world is full of these lonely outliers. Each one alone is explainable. An accident. A coincidence. A trick of erosion, or a fluke of geology. But together they form a constellation. A faint outline of something bigger. Something lost. What if these stones aren't errors, but remnants? Not leftovers from what we know, but fragments from something we've forgotten? We assume the past is linear. That it marches upward, century by century, toward us. But maybe it breathes instead. Expands, collapses, exhales, and starts again. Maybe civilization is not a ladder. Maybe it's a tide. And these stones? They are driftwood. Carried from a flood we never knew happened. Left on unfamiliar shores by a sea of time. We don't need to invent fantasy to be odd. We only need to look more softly at what already exists. With less defense. With more wonder. With the humility to admit, sometimes, the earth remembers better than we do. And if stones this old still bear the fingerprints of intention, then what else might be waiting, buried beneath our own certainty? What else sleeps beneath the dust? And if stones can survive this long, who placed them there? When the ocean swallowed memory. The sea does not erase, it enfolds. It does not destroy what it takes. It cradles it in silence, suspends it in stillness, drapes it in blue. And over centuries, it forgets. But maybe, just maybe, it remembers too. All around the world, beneath the shallows and the surge, are the broken edges of something that used to be. Steps carved into coral. Columns buried in sand. Alignments that mimic architecture, now drowned. At first glance, they look like chance. Rock shelves. Sea-worn formations. Nature, being clever again. But sometimes the symmetry is too clean. The angles too stubborn. The depth too strange. How did they get there? The earth breathes in cycles. Sea levels rise and fall. 10,000 years ago, entire coastlines were plains. Forests stretched across what are now ocean floors. Rivers ran where sharks now swim. And if people once lived there, if a civilization once thrived along those ancient shores, what remains of it now? Not much. Wood rots. Metal rusts. But stone remembers. In India's Gulf of Khumbat, sonar scans revealed a grid-like pattern deep beneath the waves. In the Caribbean, tales of submerged ruins echo in local memory. In Doggerland, the land that once connected Britain to Europe, stone tools have been dredged from beneath the sea. We call them outliers. We move on. But what if we didn't? What if we asked, did something exist there? Something complex? Something that never saw a scribe or a pyramid or a written word, but still understood? Still built? Still dreamed? And then, the ocean rose. Not in a moment, but in centuries. Slowly, patiently. Drowning memory inch by inch. Carrying away songs, cities, stories until only the fish remained. If a culture falls beneath the sea, does it still exist in time? Or only in myth? So many flood legends. So many sunken cities in ancient stories. Not just Noah. Not just Atlantis. Cultures from every continent remember waters that came too fast. Worlds that were washed away. Lives that vanished beneath the waves. Were they exaggerations? Were they memories? Or both? We stand now on land that was once sea. And we forget that the reverse is also true. The ocean has its own history. Its own dead. Its own ruins, smoothed by salt and time. And if we ever listen to the sea, not with sonar, but with patience, perhaps we'll hear it hum with names no longer spoken. And if memory sleeps beneath the tides, who, once, stood on that forgotten shore? The soil that whispers of cities. Underscore 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 underscore. Beneath our feet, the earth is not silent. It holds layers, like pages, like breaths, like memory pressed into dust. And if you learn how to listen, you'll hear it. In the quiet compression of sediment. In the strange dark stains in the soil. In patterns that should not be there. Somewhere, far from pyramids and palaces, the ground tells a quieter story. A story not carved in stone, but in absence. Satellite imagery sometimes reveals it first. A perfect rectangle hidden in forest. A pattern in the dryness of crops. lines that only appear from above, too straight, too organized, too human to be natural. And yet, no ruins lie there. No roads. No temples. Just silence. Just soil. But archaeologists know this silence. It's called a geoglyph when the ground itself is the canvas. It's called ground-penetrating radar when we peel back layers without lifting a spade. And what we find, sometimes, is astonishing. Entire cities, buried not by disaster, but by time. Not destroyed, just forgotten. In the Amazon rainforest, beneath the thickest green, lie networks of mounds, causeways, and canals. Signs of engineering. Urban planning. Civilization. Lost beneath centuries of leaves. We thought the jungle was eternal. But it grew over something. And in Turkey's Konya plain, before the plow, there were signs of ancient farming on a scale too large for simple tribes. Complex irrigation. Circular settlements. All beneath layers of silt, long untouched. If we stripped away the grass, would we see streets? And how many such places sleep beneath the deserts? The tundra? The vast uninhabited spaces we never think to question? Most of human history was not written in ink. It was written in land use. And the earth remembers where we walked. But it forgets in its own way. By growing over. By covering gently. By turning roads into root paths. Walls into worm-burrowed beds. Homes into humus. So we must ask softly. What if we are not the first? Not because of some myth. But because the land shows signs. Because soil doesn't lie. Because maybe, just maybe, the earth has been shaped more times than we've recorded. And if cities have vanished without a trace, how would we even know they were there? The civilization that left no trash. It's strange, isn't it? That we measure civilizations by what they leave behind. Pottery shards. Tool fragments. Broken bones. Garbage heaps turned to gold mines for modern mines. But what if a people didn't leave trash? What if they lived lightly, so lightly that they left no trace? No concrete. No plastics. No metal tools that resist decay. Just wood, cloth, bone, and silence. In 1,000 years, would we know they ever lived? Entropy is a quiet eraser. It favors the perishable. It loves the organic. A hut made of reeds can disappear in decades. A village of clay melts back into the dust. A people without writing can vanish completely. And yet they may have had stories. Systems. Traditions. Complexity. We are biased by visibility. We assume that to be advanced is to be large, loud, permanent. But what if intelligence once wore softer shoes? What if the height of civilization was sustainability? Not building to last forever, but building to return? There's no reason an ancient culture had to evolve the way we did. They may not have needed pyramids. Or coins. Or wars. Perhaps their technology wasn't made of bronze, but of biology. Materials that decomposed on purpose. Techniques passed mouth to ear, not etched in stone. Medicines made from plants we've long since lost. Whole worlds could have bloomed and died and left only legends behind. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigators used nothing but stars, waves, and birds to map vast oceans. Their knowledge was oral, ephemeral, and yet it crossed the sea. In Siberia, nomadic peoples have built collapsible homes for millennia. They do not remain. But they return with each season, with each wind. We think permanence means importance. But nature teaches otherwise. Perhaps the greatest civilizations were composted. folded back into the earth, like a prayer whispered and forgotten? If so, how many stories have we mistaken for myths? How many ghosts are just gardeners? And how do we search for what never wanted to be found? The sky temples we can't explain. Sometimes, we look up, and the stones look back. Across the planet, in deserts and jungles and mountaintops, lie ancient structures that reach toward the sky aligned to stars, solstices, and secrets written in light. Stone circles. Horizon markers. Massive observatories that predate metal tools. Why? Why were our ancestors so obsessed with the sky? And how did they do it with such precision? At Nabta Playa, in the Nubian desert, massive slabs align with the rising sun. Older than Stonehenge. Built when the Sahara was still green. At Chanquillo, in Peru, a row of towers lines the horizon. A calendar in stone. Marking solstices. Measuring seasons. Shaped not for shelter, but for time itself. And at Göbekli Tepe, again, we find animal constellations carved into T-shaped pillars. Celestial references older than agriculture. These are not random. Not decorative. They are deliberate. They show a mind not just observing, but understanding. But what kind of culture would build temples to the stars before it built cities on Earth? Perhaps they saw the sky not as distant, but as memory. A map. A code. A rhythm echoing what they knew inside. Stars are reliable. They move, but they repeat. Maybe that repetition was their clock. Their compass. Their God. Or maybe it was their warning. Because skies change. The wobble of the earth alters alignments. Ancient star maps no longer match modern constellations. And yet, some sites still trace patterns long since invisible. Did someone once know more? Did someone once see something we've forgotten? Not because of aliens. But because of attention. Because of awe. Because maybe, just maybe, a civilization once studied the sky not with machines, but with wonder. And built its memories in stone. So we ask again. If they looked up and saw more than we do. If they measured time in stars and seasons. If they built temples that still echo the heavens. What else did they know? And what have we missed, staring at the ground? Underscore 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 underscore. The cities that sank into ice. Not all things are lost to water. Some are lost to cold. We think of ice as still, unchanging. But it moves. It creeps. It buries. And deep within the oldest glaciers, there may be more than fossils. There may be footprints. During the last ice age, massive sheets of frozen silence covered much of the planet. But between them, in pockets of temperate land, life bloomed. Some scientists call these refugia. Safe havens. Tiny Earths within a frozen world. And if people lived there, if they adapted to the cold, learned its rhythms, its moods, what would they have built? Nothing that would last long. Wood splits in permafrost. Bones fracture. Fire leaves almost no trace in the snow. And when the ice returns, it flattens. Compresses. Hides. Entire landscapes swallowed beneath glaciers. In Greenland, ice cores tell stories. Dust from ancient fires. Layers of volcanic ash. Even fragments of DNA left by animals, plants, maybe humans. We are only beginning to ask. Could civilizations have flourished in the cold? Not advanced in machines, but in meaning? Living close to the land. Migrating with herds. Building with snow and sinew and skin. Stories sung, not written. Maps drawn in memory, not ink. A people like this would vanish completely if the ice decided to move. And move it does. Glaciers scrape away history like a blade. But sometimes they preserve. Like Otzi, the Iceman, found frozen in the Alps with tools, tattoos, and knowledge we didn't expect. Not a myth. Not a mystery. Just a memory, paused. So we wonder. How many others lie sleeping in the ice? How many cities, swallowed not by ocean, but by time's cold breath? And what would they tell us if the ice ever melts? The civilization beneath the ash. Ash is a paradox. It destroys, and yet it preserves. When a volcano erupts, it ends worlds. But it also seals them. Moments caught in fire. Streets frozen in death. Doors left open. Meals half-eaten. History flash-burned into memory. Pompeii is our most famous example. But it's not the only one. Around the globe, there are buried cities beneath ancient eruptions. Forgotten communities, flash-entombed in silence. Not because they mattered to us, but because they mattered to someone, once. At Catalhoyuk in Turkey, volcanic obsidian was traded long before metal. In Central America, the eruption of Ilopango wiped out entire populations, their names lost, their temples buried. But what if some were never found? What if, beneath layers of ash, lie cultures older than any scroll? Because lava doesn't care for legacy. It covers without judgment. And yet it can preserve what nothing else can. Grain in jars. Footprints in ash. Textiles. DNA. And more than that, it preserves context. A snapshot in time. A culture caught mid-breath. We rarely dig beneath the dead volcanoes. Too remote. Too dangerous. Too speculative. But what if that's where the answers wait? What if the stories we seek are not in museums, but beneath our feet? Ash is a grave. But it is also a glass. A way to see a world that no longer speaks. And perhaps, just perhaps, an older civilization, one lost not by time, but by fire, waits for us to remember. If only we dare to dig. If only we're willing to breathe in a little of that ancient smoke, and see what survives beneath the burn. Beneath the mantle's memory. Beneath our feet lies a silence thicker than stone. The earth's mantle, hidden, ancient, unknowable, turns slowly like a forgotten wheel of time. It does not scream, it does not write in ink, and yet it remembers. Not in words or bones, but in heat. In flow. In the folding of crust and the grinding of time. It is a kind of memory we are not built to recognize, not soft and emotional like ours, but seismic and buried. The way mountains rise and fall is a whisper. The way continents drift is a sentence. The way lost continents sink and vanish is an ellipsis, a pause so long that even myths forget to finish the story. We often look upward for answers. To the stars, the sky, the heavens. But sometimes, the greatest mysteries lie downward deep into the stone belly of our world. The crust we stand on is thin, fragile, floating on slow rivers of molten rock that churn with ancient breath. And what if something once lived on that crust? Something old, something unknowable, something now lost beneath the turning plates? The memory of such a thing wouldn't remain in a museum. It would remain in distortion. In folded strata. In twisted rock layers that shouldn't exist the way they do. Geologists have found remnants of cratons, portions of Earth's crust that have remained stable for billions of years. But here and there, anomalies surface. Rocks that don't belong to their age. Layers that are too smooth or too ordered. Deep beneath Western Australia, under parts of the Canadian Shield, even under the Atlantic Ocean, hints of something misaligned. As if a story had been written, erased, and then partially rewritten by heat and time. But what if these distortions are not accidents? What if they are scars left by a vanished age? Not caused by meteorites or natural forces alone, but by something intentional. Something built. Something buried by design, or by despair. Could a civilization so ancient, older than Egypt, older than the ice, older than language, have left behind a footprint not of stone, but of structure twisted back into geology? Of course, we have no temples from that time. No scrolls. No tools or golden masks. But what we do have are signals. Chemical signatures. Isotope deviations. Carbon anomalies locked in layers where there should be none. Like footprints in ash long cooled and hardened, found only by the most curious of eyes. And always the same question follows: if this is not nature, then what is it? Maybe we cannot find them because we expect too much of permanence. We imagine pyramids surviving sandstorms. Statues weathering centuries. But what if their ruins looked nothing like ours? What if their remnants were absorbed by the earth itself, dissolved, melted, metamorphosed? What if their architecture was not made to resist entropy, but to join it, to vanish with grace? A civilization not obsessed with legacy, but with disappearance. Could that be the sign we're missing? Sometimes I wonder if the earth itself was their archive. If instead of writing on paper or stone, they wrote in temperature gradients, in magnetic shifts, in the arrangement of atoms. Knowledge stored not for the eye, but for the seismograph. If they knew how to encode memory into the crust, into the very vibration of Earth's mantle. Could we one day read it? Could deep geophysical scans uncover an echo of intelligence we've mistaken for noise? And yet, even if they had tried to leave behind a message, even if they carved it into tectonic rhythms or buried it deep beneath volcanic plains, would we understand it? Would we know we were looking at a message? Or would it appear to us only as irregularity, as randomness, as mistake? Because maybe that's how our own ruins will appear, millions of years from now. Not as cities or machines, but as mineral chaos, twisted metal, rare earths embedded where they shouldn't be. Maybe the signs of intelligence are always mistaken for errors when enough time has passed. Still, the mantle turns. Still, it holds. Still, it remembers. We cannot go down there. Not fully. The deepest humans have ever drilled is barely a scratch. But the mantle moves regardless of our awareness. It erases and reveals. It hides and unearths. The earth is not static. It is not still. It is always forgetting. Always remembering. Always rewriting the very layers we walk upon. And if they were down there, those ancient ones, those not us, what would they think of our world today? Would they see us as loud and hurried, our buildings temporary, our memory fragile? Would they feel pity, or kinship, or warning? Or would they simply not see us at all, buried as we are in our own distractions, unaware of the mantle's slow breath beneath? Somewhere in that deep, the heat stirs. Rock folds. Pressure builds. And with it, perhaps, a trace, a shimmer of intelligence embedded like a fossil no paleontologist can find. And yet, if the Earth's own body carries such secrets, what happens when that body turns again? What happens when what lies below begins to rise once more? The stones that shouldn't exist. There are stones in the world that do not fit. Not in time. Not in place. Not in the slow, expected rhythm of geology. They rise from the earth like questions, quiet, solid, impossible. Some are too perfectly shaped. Others contain metals that should not be there. And some are carved or fractured in ways that make no sense in nature. We find them scattered on mountaintops, in deserts, beneath oceans, even in the deepest caves. We call them outliers, anomalies, curiosities. But what if they are something else entirely? What if these misplaced stones are all that remain of a language we no longer speak? A story told in pressure, in fracture, in the quiet geometry of mineral form? There are polished spheres in South Africa, too balanced, too smooth, embedded in Precambrian rock. There are vitrified fort walls in Scotland, stones melted together by a heat too intense for ancient human fires. There are megaliths in Siberia, cut and stacked with machine-like precision in an age before metal. And always, the same dismissal, coincidence. Erosion. Natural fracture. But deep down, a question stirs. Because randomness leaves fingerprints too. But not like this. Maybe we are looking for the wrong signs. We expect civilization to leave cities in bones. But what if it left puzzles? Fragments of thought too alien to immediately recognize. What if their way of building wasn't ours? What if their structures were designed to decay in a particular way, revealing themselves only to those who notice pattern in chaos? These stones, the ones that shouldn't exist, defy our timelines. They speak of something else, some other order, now collapsed. Some logic we do not teach. Not because they are magical, but because they do not fit our story. And so we set them aside, like dreams that don't match the waking world. But dreams can be true. Dreams can be real. Especially when they repeat, over and over, across continents. The earth does not lie. But it can forget. Or worse, it can only remember in whispers. Entropy's gentle hand. Everything tends towards silence. Mountains fall. Rivers smooth. Bones turn to dust. Entropy is not cruel. It is not quick. It is patient. Kind, even. It touches everything softly. It does not destroy, it dissolves. Gently, endlessly. The civilizations of the past, ours, and maybe others, are not buried by war or fire. They are buried by forgetting. Entropy is the true editor of history. It smooths every edge. Blurs every line. The greatest works of any age, if left untouched, become soil. And in this gentle undoing, there is a kind of mercy. Because memory, too, is heavy. And perhaps, just perhaps, the first civilization did not fight this forgetting. Perhaps it welcomed it. What if they saw entropy not as an enemy, but as the final brushstroke? A way to return their world to silence. A gift to the future, to leave no trace. To allow the earth to breathe again. We think permanence is power. But maybe impermanence is wisdom. Everything we build now fights time. Concrete. Plastic. Radiation. But maybe, long ago, there was a people who chose the opposite. Who chose disappearance. Who built not to last, but to vanish. Who placed their secrets inside materials meant to fade. So their world would return to the earth like ash, like breath, like dream. Entropy is not just decay. It is transformation. And in its soft, inevitable touch, there may be fingerprints. Of something more. The architecture of disappearance. Not every structure is meant to stand forever. Some are meant to fall. To melt. To vanish without a trace. We imagine ancient cities as stone and steel. But what if the first civilization built with different values? What if their architecture was not for pride, but for peace? Not to rise, but to return? Imagine a temple grown from mycelium, soft, living, aware. A tower woven from resin and ash, designed to dissolve with time. Imagine walls made of compressed earth, encoded not with words, but frequencies, resonant patterns that spoke to the rocks themselves. What if buildings were alive? What if they chose when to end? There is no ruin like this left to us. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded. The architecture of disappearance is sacred. It does not resist the wind. It listens to it. It does not hold back rain. It invites it in. It becomes the land again, particle by particle. No conquest can desecrate such a structure, because it is already becoming memory. Maybe that's why we have found nothing. Maybe we are looking for permanence, when what was left behind was grace. Perhaps their greatest structures are still here, just not in form, but in effect. In the way a mountain feels heavier than it should. In the unusual warmth of an ancient hill. In the fault lines that form patterns too intentional to be random. Some ruins don't look like ruins. Some ruins look like silence. The forgotten alphabet of the earth. What if the earth itself once carried a language? Not written in ink. Not carved in stone. But in shape, in energy, in frequency. What if an ancient civilization didn't write with symbols, but with resonance? A song encoded in the rocks, a whisper in the wind's path, an alphabet too wide, too slow, for us to notice? We read the past through letters. Through numbers. Through scratches on clay. But the earth records in deeper ways. In isotope ratios. In mineral alignments. In thermal echoes that never fade. What if they knew this? What if they spoke the earth's own language and taught it to respond? It would not be a language we could hear. It would be a language we feel. Like the pressure before an earthquake. Like the stillness before a storm. In parts of the world, stone sings. Under the right pressure, in the right silence, it hums. Resonates. Vibrates in subtle tones. What if this was no accident? What if entire hills were once instruments? Designed to carry messages not to people, but to the earth itself? We may never read these messages. But they are still there. Etched not in time, but in energy. Not in shape, but in rhythm. When oceans rise and erase. Water is the gentlest destroyer. It does not strike. It does not burn. It simply arrives, and waits. Rising, inch by inch. Year by year. And when the sea comes, it does not rage, it embraces. It takes cities into its arms like a mother reclaiming her child. It covers everything. And then, it forgets. The ocean is vast. Deep enough to bury not just empires, but time itself. Beneath its surface lie valleys larger than any on land. Mountains taller than Everest. Plains that once may have held forests, rivers, maybe even dreams. What if the first civilization lived there? On lands now drowned? There are ruins off the coasts of India, Japan, and Cuba, structures swallowed by rising seas. Some say they are natural. Others say they are too precise. Too symmetrical. Too deliberate. But the ocean does not explain. It only muffles. And maybe that's the point. A civilization that understood the tides might not have fought the flood. It might have welcomed it. Built for it. Or vanished beneath it by design. Perhaps their monuments were meant to be read only by the sea. Perhaps their memory was always meant to dissolve like salt. What we call loss, they may have called return. The pulse beneath the ice. Under the polar ice, something moves. Not fast. Not loud. But steady. The ice caps are not still, they slide, they shift, they sigh. Beneath them, the Earth pulses. And in that buried rhythm, some scientists have found strange anomalies. Heat signatures that shouldn't be there. Structures too symmetrical to be natural. Radar reflections that seem deliberate. What sleeps beneath Antarctica? What lies buried beneath miles of cold and silence? The ice has hidden many things: forests, rivers, fossils. But what if it hides something more? Something older than trees. Older than bones. Something shaped not by nature, but by mind. We imagine the past as warm, fertile, green. But what if the cold was once a refuge? What if an ancient people fled the heat of some forgotten cataclysm and found safety in the cold? And what if they stayed, building beneath the ice not to be found, but to be forgotten? We may never dig that deep. But the earth knows. The ice remembers. It presses down like a hand, sealing away not just fossils, but intentions. And as the world warms, the ice begins to lift. What waits beneath, we do not know. But perhaps it has been waiting for us. Beneath the ash, the fires that once spoke. Not all stories are carved in stone. Some are written in ash, whispered in soot, and carried away by the breath of time. Beneath the surface of the earth, where ancient heat once boiled beneath thin crusts, lie the ghost traces of fires long extinguished. Not wildfires, not volcanic storms, but the slow, controlled kind. Fires that knew purpose. Fires that gathered, not scattered. Across scorched plateaus and buried valleys, archaeologists sometimes stumble upon something strange. Layers of ancient charcoal, embedded deep in undisturbed sediment. In places where no natural fires could have burned. In times when no human civilization was meant to exist. But the charcoal is there. Silent. Waiting. Layered between soil horizons like forgotten sentences in a long-erased diary. Charcoal, it doesn't decay like wood. It lingers. Its structure remains stable for tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of years. Scientists know this. They use it to trace fire events, climate changes, human settlements. But when the charcoal appears far too old, when it lies buried too deep beneath modern memory, the questions begin to flicker. What if someone once tended these flames? What if a mind, not lightning, lit these fires? A mind unknown to us, lost to erosion, buried under cycles of ice and rain and time. Perhaps they burned for warmth. Or for ritual. Or for metallurgy. Or maybe simply to gather in the light, to speak beneath the stars in a glow they made themselves. It's easy to dismiss the possibility. Our timelines are rigid, our eras carefully arranged. But ash has no allegiance to our frameworks. It only tells us it was burned. That something once was here, and now it is not. And what of the fire-altered stone? The slabs cracked not by tectonics but by thermal shock? The burnt earth floors in caves with no known inhabitants? These fragments don't cry out. They only smolder softly in the records, half-mentioned, often unstudied. Maybe because to study them would be to open a door we don't quite want to walk through. Could it be that some form of fire wisdom came long before our own? Not our ancestors, not even our species, but something else? Something whose hands no longer hold anything, whose breath no longer feeds the flame. Something whose culture vanished in smoke and was never told again? And if fire once meant culture, if flame meant communication, invention, shared space, then how much could have grown from it? Not skyscrapers. Not satellites. But simple, intelligent things. Ceramics, perhaps. Smoke signals. Cooked food. Community. The kind of life that doesn't leave machines, but leaves mood, leaves rhythm, leaves a haunting absence when it's gone. We tend to think of fire as a tool that defines humanity. But what if it defined others before us? What if we were not the first to gather around it and wonder? Not the first to let its light flicker in our eyes and reflect on the nature of existence? Not the first to stare into embers and whisper myths to the dark? And then, it all went quiet. Perhaps there was a drought, or a flood, or a series of volcanic winters. Perhaps the air grew too thin, or too toxic. Or maybe, simply, they moved on. The species changed. The culture decayed. The knowledge, unshared, was lost. But not all of it. The ash remains. Not everywhere. Just here and there. Enough to make a pattern. Enough to make us pause. And so we come back to the silence. To the stillness beneath our feet. To the ruins we cannot see, not because they are hidden by walls or vines, but because they have dissolved into the very elements. Dissolved, and re-entered the cycle. Maybe the soil remembers. Maybe the carbon atoms still echo faintly with intention. Maybe, in the structure of that ancient black powder, a mind once moved. A thought once sparked. We sift through these ashes like dreamers trying to reassemble a vision after waking. We pick up fragments, place them beside each other, squint, and hope to see meaning. We might be wrong. We might be reaching. But we keep reaching anyway. Because even if these fires were natural, even if these charred remains are simply tricks of the earth, there is something haunting in their presence. They whisper of heat, of gatherings, of change. They whisper of something that once was, and now isn't. And what more profound echo of civilization could there be? Not the monuments. Not the machines. But the gatherings around fire. The choice to make warmth in a cold world. The knowledge to harness it. The wisdom to share it. Even if no cities followed. Even if no language survived. Even if no bones remained to tell the tale. Perhaps they spoke in fire. And now, we listen in silence. And if the earth remembers flame that ancient, if it holds within its layers the soot of forgotten peoples, what else might it hold? What other subtle shadows linger in the strata? What other warmth, long cooled, might still flicker in the dark? And if this much can be hidden in a handful of ash, what other memories have been burned to dust? Beneath the lake that remembers. There are places on this planet where water becomes a vault. Lakes that sit quietly for thousands of years, whispering nothing to the winds. But beneath their still surfaces, secrets settle. Pollen grains from vanished forests. Traces of soot from fires that no longer burn. Even the faint shadows of metals, strange alloys not native to the surrounding land. We found these signals in ancient lakebeds, buried under layers of silt like slow-forgotten dreams. Could a civilization have once rimmed these shores, living and dying before Egypt's first pharaoh even opened his eyes? No monuments remain, no tools, no bones, only quiet chemical hints, as if someone once breathed here, deeply, and then vanished. The sediments do not lie, but they do not shout either. They speak in isotope ratios and magnetic alignments, in ways only the earth truly understands. Was this water once drawn by forgotten hands? Did they too look up at the sky and wonder where the stars go at dawn? The lake remembers, even if we do not. And beneath its mirrored face, stories drift weightless, waiting. Waiting for eyes that know how to read without pages. Waiting for us. The clock hidden in the mountains. Not all clocks tick. Some crumble. Others hum silently under pressure, buried in stone. The mountains do not speak of time in seconds, they measure it in stress and fold, in uplift and silence. And hidden within these folds are seams, veins, and layers we cannot explain. We find traces of rare earth elements too evenly distributed. We find strata with no matching neighbor, too old, too processed, too changed. It's as if someone long ago bent the earth for reasons we can no longer decipher. The mineralogical record bears the fingerprint of energy, but not of nature. Could this be the aftermath of mines, smelters, or machines too ancient for our models? Or was it something stranger, a technique so sophisticated it left no tools behind, only changed geology? The idea is easy to dismiss. But the rock layers do not forget. The mountains hold their secrets with the patience of gods, waiting until erosion or curiosity finally pries them loose. And sometimes, under the weight of a geologist's hammer or a satellite stare, the mountain whispers, not in words, but in mismatches. In impossibilities. In clues too quiet to be mistakes. The bones that never should be. There are bones we understand. Human, animal, fossil. We know how to measure their age, where to place them in the tree of life. But now and then, something appears that refuses to fit. A femur too large. A jaw too narrow. A hip bone shaped not for walking, but for something else, something we've never seen. Most are reburied in silence, filed away as anomalies. But some linger. Some are found deep beneath strata where no human should be, near objects with no context. Once, in a South African cave, a fossilized tibia showed spiral scoring. Neither animal tooth nor known tool could have made such marks. Once, in the Arctic permafrost, a fragment of rib bore metallic residue, aged not in centuries, but in epochs. And once, on a high Andean plateau, a skull was unearthed with a cranial cavity elongated not by ritual, but by birth. Could there have been another kind of human? Or not human at all? Maybe they walked before us or beside us, lost to time and ice. Their bones don't speak our language. But they ask questions anyway. Machines in the stone. It sounds like fantasy. Machines, buried in rock? And yet, a sphere embedded in 2.8 billion-year-old sediment. Grooved, metallic, balanced perfectly. A network of straight-line tunnels beneath Nevada's mountains, drilled through quartzite as if it were butter. In Russia, stone wheels and cogs too heavy to lift, abandoned in caves no culture claimed. These aren't relics in museums. They are dismissed, written off as oddities, natural formations, misidentified debris. But some geologists whisper different thoughts. Some wonder if entropy has a way of hiding technology so well that it looks like geology. If a machine is old enough, it stops looking like a machine. It becomes a fossil of function. What if our definition of technology is too young? Too human? What if the Earth's crust is not merely a record of biology, but a scrapyard of forgotten purpose? We dig for oil and stumble across mysteries. We quarry for stone and chip away at forgotten stories. We don't know how to see the difference yet. But the rock remembers. Underscore 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 underscore. The forests that shouldn't exist. Every ecosystem has its time. Ferns and mosses dominated the Carboniferous. Pines ruled before flowers. But here and there, we find whispers of forests that don't belong. Petrified groves in deserts where no water has flowed for millions of years. Tree rings showing explosive growth during supposed extinction winters. Fossilized leaves with molecular patterns unfamiliar to modern botany, plants that don't match any known lineage. Once, in an Iranian salt dome, a root system was found fossilized inside crystal. It dated back 200 million years, yet bore signs of controlled irrigation. Too symmetrical. Too efficient. Was it a freak of nature or of nurture? Did someone tend these trees long before we imagined mines existed? Maybe these forests were not just homes, but experiments. Greenhouses without glass. Terrariums seeded by lost hands. If a civilization loved trees, would it leave behind buildings or seeds? We've learned to read tree rings for droughts and volcanoes. But what if, in their spacing, their scars, their geometry, something else is encoded? A message planted. Rooted in deep time. The ghosts of the global pulse. Every few million years, Earth pulses. A breath. A rearrangement. Continents shift. Oceans rise. Species vanish. We call them extinction events, but that's only part of the story. They're not just endings, they're resets. And sometimes, when we look closely at these pulses, we see patterns that look almost planned. Like they follow an unseen rhythm. Like something once tried to guide the planet, to stabilize it, or to clear the slate. Were these events entirely natural? Supervolcanoes. Asteroid strikes. Methane burps from the sea floor. All real, all terrifying. But what if one of these pulses was not an accident? What if something intelligent once intervened, not to survive, but to step back? To disappear deliberately. Some species go extinct unwillingly. Others fade by choice. Could a civilization decide it had gone far enough? Could it build itself into entropy, and vanish through design rather than disaster? The global pulse is not just a heartbeat of destruction, it is a heartbeat of change. And in its rhythm, perhaps, a goodbye still echoes. The river that changed its mind. Rivers are storytellers. They carve memories into the land, meandering with age, sculpting canyons like sentences written in stone. But sometimes, rivers change their minds. They abandon their beds, vanish underground, or flow backward without warning. In India's their desert, dry channels ghost through satellite images, once mighty rivers, now sand-sunk and nameless. Beneath the Sahara, sonar has traced an ancient river system larger than the Nile, buried under dunes older than memory. Who lived beside those lost waters? What voices once rose from their banks before the rivers slipped away? In South America, one river bends at a perfect 90-degree angle, as if redirected not by erosion, but by design. Some say it's coincidence. Others believe the earth sometimes yields to ancient hands. A civilization older than Egypt might not leave ruins, but it might leave rivers that flow where they should not. Perhaps once, long ago, water obeyed maps that have long since turned to dust. And perhaps the river remembers its command, even when we no longer do. The language of stone circles. Stone circles rise across continents, etched into moors, deserts, and islands. Stonehenge. Nabta Playa. Kallanish. But not all are famous. Many remain hidden, half-buried, misaligned, overlooked. We call them ceremonial, astronomical, symbolic. But what if they were also functional? What if they were machines of memory, tools to speak with the sky, or even one another? Some circles match star positions from tens of thousands of years ago. Others hum with strange magnetic fields. One in Siberia is so precisely cut that engineers question how it was built with Bronze Age tools. What if these circles were not isolated efforts, but fragments of a global architecture? A language in stone, written by a vanished intelligence. Not a language of letters, but of angles. Of alignments. Of placement. Perhaps the builders spoke with shadow and sunrise. Perhaps these were once the synapses of a civilization's thought open to the heavens, grounded in the earth. And maybe, just maybe, they still whisper when the wind is right. The code in the coral. Coral reefs are archives of the sea. Every year, they lay down layers, rings like trees, capturing temperature, salinity, and memory. But some corals, especially deep water species, have recorded anomalies, chemical signatures that suggest sudden, unnatural changes long before human industry began. Spikes in rare isotopes. Shifts in trace metals. Drops in ocean alkalinity with no known volcanic cause. These are not frequent. They appear like glitches, brief and ancient. Could they mark the echo of a lost civilization that touched the oceans before us? A people who lived on floating cities, or who seeded the reefs with their refuse? One theory suggests corals once grew differently, faster, brighter, responding to something in the water that no longer exists. Not pollution. Not life. But a forgotten technology. A byproduct of something vast. The coral does not accuse. It merely preserves. And as our oceans warm and change again, it may soon reveal the full shape of the story it has quietly stored for millennia. Cities of salt and silence. Salt preserves. In the right conditions, it can keep wood, flesh, even footprints intact for millennia. Deep beneath the deserts of Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Chile, explorers have found strange voids, perfect chambers carved in crystalline salt, untouched by tools we recognize. No markings. No tombs. Just silence and symmetry. Were these mines? Dwellings? Temples? The salt does not say. But in its layers, trapped pockets of air suggest past atmosphere's oxygen levels far older than expected. In one chamber, fossilized insects lie in a pattern, as if arranged. In another, geometric etchings too regular for chance. Could a civilization have lived within the salt, hidden from storm and sky? If so, they were not forgotten, they chose erasure. Salt demands no monument. But it offers sanctuary for secrets. Even now, when light first touches those vaults after ages of darkness, it falls softly, like memory returning. The forest that speaks in fire. In a remote corner of Australia, a forest stands where no forest should be. Its species are relics, plants believed extinct, some known only from fossils. The ground is charred, layered with centuries of burn and regrowth, but the trees persist. Some bear bark that flakes like graphite. Others bleed sap that crystallizes instantly, like glass. The indigenous people speak of this forest as sacred, a place where the sky once fell, where fire walked with feet. And in the soil, geologists have found microbads of fused silica, as if the land was flash melted by intense heat, but from no known source. Not volcanic. Not meteoric. Perhaps once, something vast burned here, not a natural fire, but an event. A failed experiment? A warning? A ritual? Maybe this forest grew back in defiance, or by design. Perhaps these strange plants are not wild, but chosen. Cultivated. Carried forward from a world we never knew. Their leaves shimmer oddly at night, as if still remembering light that no longer exists. The earthquake that wrote a name. There was once an earthquake in the Aegean. It cracked open a mountainside and revealed a pattern, a series of concentric arcs etched into limestone. At first, they seemed like fractures. But closer inspection revealed precision. The arcs mirrored lunar cycles, star paths, even seismic frequencies. Who carved this beneath the surface? No one. It was not man-made. But neither was it random. Some scientists believe these earthquake glyphs are geological coincidence. Others suspect something more, a message written into the fault lines themselves. What if a civilization once seeded its memory in tectonics? Not in paper, not in stone tablets, but in the Earth's own movements? A language of stress and echo. A script of vibration. Impossible? Perhaps. But sometimes, what seems chaotic is only unreadable. The earthquake did not speak. But it left behind a name, a signature, perhaps, that has not yet been understood. The dust that carries a song. In the upper atmosphere, dust floats, a mix of cosmic particles, volcanic ash, and strange trace compounds. Every so often, scientists capture samples that confuse their instruments. Polymers that shouldn't exist. Molecules shaped too cleanly, as if manufactured. Tiny spheres of carbon, hollow, uniform, ancient. This dust drifts slowly, circling the globe, settling in ice cores, on mountaintops, in lungs. Some believe it comes from meteorites. Others whisper of industrial processes long gone. But there is a theory more daring still, that this dust is residue. That it's what's left when a civilization burns itself into the sky. In sound labs, certain particles resonate when exposed to specific frequencies, as if they remember vibration. As if they respond not to heat or pressure, but to music. What if a people once used sound as we use fire? What if their legacy is not buried, but airborne? A song still carried in the breath of the world. The civilization that chose the sea. If you were to vanish, truly vanish, where would you go? Into the forests? The mountains? Or beneath the sea? The ocean is vast, cold, and secret. And we've barely explored it. There are plateaus beneath the waves larger than countries, ridges shaped like walls, steps, and spires. Sonar sometimes maps what seems like cities' regular blocks, streets, patterns too orderly for nature. But the sea distorts. It hides with pressure and time. Some myths speak of those who went into the water not by accident, but by choice. Refugees of fire. Seekers of silence. Engineers of breath and brine. Could an entire civilization have relocated to the deeps, choosing currents over continents? In hydrothermal vents, we've found alloys no natural process should forge. In sunken caves, skeletons with cranial shapes unfamiliar. Perhaps they didn't die. Perhaps they changed. The sea keeps secrets because it is not ours. But someone else's, maybe. And their story is still unfolding in the quiet blue below.
The forest that didn't grow alone. There are places on this planet where the trees grow in strange alignment. Not by species. Not by light. But by something older. Something quieter. Groves that bend at the same angle. Rings that widen in unison. Patterns in bark that repeat across continents, though the soil never spoke between them. You might not notice it at first. It looks like forest. It smells like pine and loam and thyme. But something about the way the trees grow feels intentional. As though they were placed, not scattered. Arranged, not wild. A symmetry that isn't perfect, but persistent. A language written in chlorophyll and canopy. And the question settles like fog between the trunks: what if this forest didn't grow alone? In deep time, forests are temporary. They rise, burn, shift. Climate pulls them north, then south. Ice returns and takes them. Seeds scatter and try again. But the forests that remain, those that whisper in ancient valleys untouched by machines, they carry something more than genetics. They carry memory. Some scientists have studied these strange alignments. Tree ring synchronicities beyond expected climate correlations. Genomic patterns suggesting not just shared ancestry, but coordinated growth. A kind of botanical choreography, trees responding not only to light and soil, but to something underneath. Maybe it's magnetic. Maybe it's vibrational. Maybe it's chemical memory carried by the roots. Or maybe it's something planted long ago. Something designed. Because buried beneath some of these forests are old stones. Not buildings. Not ruins. but flat rock slabs, placed horizontally just beneath the root line, as though someone once laid a floor across the land, and then walked away. Who would do that? And why? Was it for ritual? For agriculture? For shelter? Or was it a garden? Not a garden as we know it, not of vegetables and harvest, but of ecosystems. Living sculptures. Art that breathes. Could there have been a civilization not of towers, but of trees? One that shaped forests not with axe, but with seed? It's not impossible. Today, we call it permaculture, agroforestry, mycoengineering. But those are modern terms for something ancient. Even now, indigenous communities around the world remember how to tend land without conquering it, how to guide growth without erasing wilderness. Perhaps the civilization before history didn't build pyramids or walls. Perhaps they grew their knowledge into the land itself. And in doing so, became invisible. Because living things don't fossilize like tools do. Leaves decay. Bark returns to dust. Only stone stays. And if they never used stone, or used it gently, then what would they leave behind? A forest. That's all. But a forest that grows, like it remembers. Roots connected not only through soil, but through intention. Branches that shape wind in a pattern. Flowers that open in synchrony beneath stars that no longer appear in the same sky. You might call it superstition. Or coincidence. Or beauty. But if you sit still enough long enough, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Bees visit flowers in the same sequence year after year. Moss grows in spirals that mirror constellations. Trees of different species lean together, not for light, but in arrangement. Some call it natural architecture. Others wonder if it's legacy. Maybe they weren't trying to build something permanent. Maybe permanence was never the point. Maybe they just wanted to leave a signal alive and breathing for someone to find. Someone like us. Maybe they knew the world would forget them. That stone erodes. That language dies. That metal rusts. So they left behind something softer. A rhythm in the trees. An equation in the canopy. A memory that smells like rain on bark and hums with the song of insects. We like to believe that intelligence builds upward. Toward height, toward structure. But what if true wisdom grows downward into roots, into soil, into the hidden conversations beneath our feet? The fungal networks we now call the Wood Wide Web, they were always there. We just didn't know how to listen. Maybe someone else did. Maybe a long-lost people spoke to the earth not with machines, but with mycelium. Not with wires, but with roots. Not with empire, but with invitation. And when they left, or when they were erased, the forest kept growing. Carrying their message in leaf and form and rhythm. And now, we walk among it. Unaware. But something stirs when you enter these places. Something beyond nostalgia. A quiet awareness. As though the forest is watching you, just as much as you're watching it. It doesn't speak. But it welcomes. It doesn't answer. But it remembers. And somewhere, just beneath the hum of the insects and the rustle of leaves, you can almost hear the echo of a thought not your own. A presence. Ancient. Rooted. Maybe we haven't discovered them because we've been looking in the wrong places. In deserts. In ruins. In stone. But they may have always been here. waiting in the forest. Not gone. Just growing. And yet, if something once shaped the trees, what other echoes might still linger, not in forests, but in stone that sings? The music etched in mineral. There are caves where sound behaves like memory. You clap once, and it lingers. You whisper, and the echo returns in harmony. These places were not carved by chance. They sing. Their walls curve like instruments, and their silence is never still. Scientists call it resonance. Acoustics shaped by geology. But in some of these caves, deep, untouched, sacred, the sound is too precise. Frequencies align with human voice, with drumbeat, with breath. It's as though the rock was tuned. Not stumbled upon. Not stumbled into. But shaped. What kind of hands would tune a cave? And why? In France, the walls of Paleolithic caves are covered in ochre animals. But the drawings are clustered, not random, they cluster in zones where the resonance is strongest. Paintings of mammoths and bison align with the echo of footsteps, of chant. Did they paint what they hunted, or what they heard? Maybe this was no accident. Maybe it was memory. A way of encoding something deeper than story, a language of vibration. A form of transmission not of words, but of waves. What if someone once carved the earth itself into a score? Not to be read, but to be played. Rock art as notation. Chamber as chorus. Cavern as cathedral of sound. It's not impossible. Even today, sound is used to scan stone, to image the deep layers of the planet. And in reverse, stone stores sound through echo, through texture, through form. What if, long before music became melody, someone learned to etch song into mineral? Not with instruments, but with space. Not with voice, but with structure. A civilization that didn't build towers, but chambers. Tunnels and chambers that hummed back. That remembered. That resonated. Not every song is made of notes. Some are made of silence. The ancients may have known that silence is not absence. It's potential. It's the breath before the sound. The space that holds meaning. And inside these caves, that space still listens. Modern microphones detect subsonic frequencies in certain caverns, hums too low for ears, but not for skin. Tones that stir the nervous system, that affect perception. The caves, it seems, are still playing. But who composed them? What was the melody? Could it be that a civilization once shaped its memory not in books, but in waves? Encoded its stories not in symbols, but in echo? Taught its children not through written language, but by placing them in chambers of sound, tones so low they bypass logic, and speak instead to memory, to feeling? And if so, is it still speaking? We have built grand instruments, violins, pianos, choirs of metal and wire. But we did not build the earth. And yet, in these caves, the earth becomes instrument. Was it always meant to be? We think of culture as visible. Buildings. Roads. Artifacts. But maybe the deepest civilizations chose invisibility. Chose resonance. After all, sound can survive when structure fails. It's more adaptable. More intimate. More enduring than any stone face. And what if some of that vibration is still moving, bouncing through tunnels, swirling through granite hollows, waiting for someone quiet enough to hear? We often say ancient people listened to the earth. But what if, once, the earth listened back? And yet, if sound can be carved into stone, what else might still echo, not in rock, but in soil too complex to be silent? Soil is not dirt. It is not waste. It is not background. It is memory made soft. Every handful holds the record of what lived, what died, what decayed, and sometimes, what should not be there at all. In the Amazon, vast regions of forest grow on patches of black earth, terra preta, they call it. Rich. Fertile. Unlike the natural soil around it. It shouldn't exist. Yet it does, man-made, crafted from charcoal and waste and biology. Sustained by intention. But who made it? And how? The people there now do not know. They say it was always there. That the soil predates memory. Predates their ancestors. So who taught the earth to be more generous? Modern scientists can't replicate it exactly. Not yet. There's an intelligence to the microbial composition, a logic to the ratios, a balance that seems engineered. But engineered by whom? And why? The soil grows better than the forest does alone. It remembers what to feed. It recalls how to protect roots from drought. It fosters diversity like a gardener who knows each seed by name. Is it possible someone once knew how to design soil as technology? Not with machines, but with decay. Not with wires, but with time. The forest doesn't grow randomly. It follows this silent pattern. As if someone, long ago, sowed the blueprint of a forest that would grow forever. And we have mistaken that code for wilderness. We call it nature. But what if it's nurture? What if ancient soil is not just residue, but architecture? Today, algorithms run through our digital world. They filter, guide, suggest. But before data, before silicon, there were compost heaps. Piles of ash. Bones and shells and wood arranged just right. Left long enough to become memory. Could the forest be following a forgotten code? And what happens when we find similar soils in Africa? In Southeast Asia? In Australia? Soils that behave too similarly to be unrelated and too intelligently to be accidental? Maybe we're seeing fragments of a planetary system. A distributed intelligence. A lost algorithm that once guided ecosystems through chaos. And maybe, we're only now learning to see it. What if the Earth has been trying to show us how to listen? And we, with our maps, our meters, our need for speed, have been too loud to hear? But the soil waits. Quietly. Patiently. And when we dig gently enough, it begins to whisper. This is how memory is held, not in stone, not in words, but in rot. In roots. In the breath of worms and the decay of leaves. Maybe someone, long ago, knew that decay was not death, but code. And yet, if life once programmed the soil to remember, what if it also learned to reshape the sky itself? The planet that resets itself. The Earth does not remember as we do. It does not carry nostalgia. It does not mourn. But it does reset. It happens in intervals. Quietly. Sometimes suddenly. Other times, in waves drawn across millennia. Mass extinctions. Magnetic reversals. Continental drifts. The planet, it seems, holds a threshold, and when crossed, it wipes the slate clean. Not out of rage. But rhythm. The Permian-Triassic extinction, over 90% of marine species gone. The Great Oxidation Event, when the very air changed its nature, and ancient life suffocated in a new sky. Each time, the old world fell silent, and something unfamiliar emerged. Life reinvented itself. The planet rebalanced. We call it catastrophe. But to Earth, it is routine. What if this reset isn't random? What if there is a deeper rhythm, one we have not yet mapped, not because it's hidden, but because it's too slow for us to see? Civilizations may not fall by sword or storm, but by cycle. By forgetting. By turning the page before the chapter is done. And if there was one before us, a civilization buried not in stone but in entropy, it may have vanished not through failure, but through the quiet reset of the earth itself. Erosion doesn't care who built what. Subduction drags memory into the mantle. Forests consume ruins. The planet is the ultimate editor. It keeps only what serves its next breath. We wonder why we haven't found them, the ones who came before. Their cities, their tools, their bones. But maybe they were simply caught in the last cleansing. Maybe their monuments were made of wood, of water, of data encoded in forms we've never thought to look for. Maybe they saw it coming, the reset, and chose to disappear with grace. Maybe we are their second draft. And maybe, if we listen closely, we can hear the early murmurs of the next reset now. The climate shifts. The ocean acidifies. The species go silent. Tectonic pressures grow restless. The earth stirs in its sleep. It's not personal. It never was. It's just time. And yet, if the earth resets itself by pattern, not by accident, what if someone once knew the rhythm? And lived by it? The civilization that lived by the cycle. What if memory didn't fade by mistake, but by design? Not because they forgot, but because they expected to. A civilization that knew the earth would change. That knew the sky would tilt. That knew their time was not forever. What would they leave behind? Not buildings. Not books. But signs. Etched into orbit. Aligned with solstices. Embedded in plant DNA, or river curvature, or rock that only cracks once every 100,000 years. There are ancient structures that mark the equinox with shadows. But some mark stranger cycles, lunar standstills, precession, the slow dance of stars only visible to eyes that wait centuries. Why build that, unless you plan to be forgotten? Maybe they measured time not in reigns or dynasties, but in how the planet breathes. Maybe they saw the rise of oceans not as crisis, but as punctuation. The pause between verses. The moment when everything must begin again. To live by the cycle is to live without clinging. Without fear of erasure. It means planting forests instead of flags. It means building meaning into movement, not monuments. Could it be that we were not meant to find them? Could it be their legacy is not in what we dig up, but in how the world still moves? We fear collapse. But they may have embraced it, the way leaves embrace falling, not as failure, but as the start of spring. And if they lived by the rhythm, maybe they left their story where only time could read it. And yet, if their wisdom was encoded in nature itself, what might we still overlook hiding in the wind, in the water, in the quiet workings of stone? The fossil that wasn't bone. There is a fossil in the high desert, a spiral, intricate and precise. It looks like bone. But it's not. Not shell. Not imprint. Not mineralized tissue. Just structure. Perfect. Geometric. A form that suggests design, but denies easy identification. Scientists call it a pseudofossil, a coincidence of mineral growth. A fluke. But it doesn't feel accidental. The way the angles align, the layers mirror, the voids hold their shape after millions of years. It feels deliberate. What kind of creature leaves a trace that isn't alive? What kind of tool petrifies without use? We assume fossils tell the story of life. But what if one tells the story of thought? Could this object, if it is an object, be a relic of intelligence, not biology? A memory cast in crystal? A forgotten device that fossilized not by chance, but because it was meant to? Not because it failed, but because it worked. Perhaps this is the only trace left by something ancient, something that didn't build with metal, but with matter itself. With silicates. With resonance. with forms that could endure the crush of time. And perhaps it waited here, patiently, until someone curious enough held it in their palm and asked, "What are you?" But it doesn't answer. It just exists. Like a comma in a language we never learned to read. And what if it's not the only one? What if the fossil record isn't missing civilization, but misinterpreting it? We look for bones and tools. But what if their legacy is shape? Pattern? A geometry passed through the crust like a signature? Maybe they didn't leave corpses. Maybe they left concepts. And yet, if a thought can fossilize, what other forms might intelligence take, ones we've mistaken for geology? Underscore 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 underscore. The glacier that paused for a moment. Glaciers are not known for mercy. They grind. They scrape. They erase mountains, swallow valleys, churn forests into pulp. Nothing resists their long advance. But in one hidden valley, the ice once stopped. For no reason. For just long enough. A pause. 3,000 years long. Long enough for something to be built. Long enough for something to be left. And then it moved again. Today, we find strange depressions in the stone there. Arranged in rows. Not quarry marks. Not wind-shaped. Smooth. Purposeful. Like something once stood there and was removed. Or buried. Geologists debate the cause. An anomaly in pressure. A shift in moisture. A fluke. But the pause was too specific. Too brief. Like a breath held. What if the glacier didn't pause by accident? What if someone asked it to? Not in words. But in balance. In offerings. In knowing how to whisper to the rhythms of the earth and be heard. The ancients lived close to ice. It was not just landscape, it was deity. They listened to the freeze and thaw. They measured time by meltwater. Maybe someone, long ago, knew how to ask the glacier to wait. Or maybe they simply built fast. In a window of warmth, before the cold returned. Either way, something was placed there. And something was lost when the ice returned. But now, it melts again. And what it buried may still be waiting. We look beneath glaciers and find mammoth bones, lost forests, seeds sealed in ice. But one day, we may find more. Not bone. Not bark. But intention. And yet, if ice can hide memory for millennia, what might the winds still carry is scattered, but not yet gone? Underscore 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 underscore. The civilization that became the wind. The wind touches everything. It carries dust, salt, spores, voices. It shapes mountains and smooths stone. It weaves through the ruins of what once was and carries away what we forget. But what if it doesn't just erase? What if it remembers? There are valleys where the wind hums at the same hour every day, a sound like distant voices. There are canyons that whistle in chords. Dunes that vibrate when stepped upon. What if someone long ago learned to shape the wind? Not as force, but as message. Not with machines, but with form structures built not to be seen, but to be heard. We imagine temples of stone. But what if their sacred spaces were invisible? Tones shaped by columns, vibrations tuned by passageways. Air itself turned into memory. Could an entire civilization leave behind its voice, not carved, but sung into the world? Could it speak still in the howling of high cliffs, in the whisper through desert grasses? The wind doesn't age. It doesn't forget. It loops across continents. Maybe it still carries the frequencies of thoughts once spoken aloud, layered into its flow. We might never decode it. But maybe we're not meant to. Maybe it's not for us. Maybe it was their way of becoming weather. Of returning to the breath of the planet. And now, they speak only when the wind moves just right. And yet, if they became the wind, could memory still be waiting in the silence between each gust? The ocean that stopped breathing. The ocean breathes, not in the way lungs do, but in rhythms just as vital. It inhales carbon, exhales warmth. It circulates nutrients, disperses oxygen, carries memory in its tides. Its surface is restless, but its depths are steady, a slow pulse moving through time, touching every shore. Without the ocean's breath, life would falter. And once, it did. At the end of the Permian period, the ocean stopped breathing. Not everywhere. But enough. It grew still. Deoxygenated. Silent. And in that hush, almost everything in the sea died. A planet-sized exhale, followed by a pause too long. The great extinction swept through the waters before it reached the land. We call it an anoxic event, but the word doesn't capture its weight. Imagine an ocean too tired to carry life. A womb turns stillbirth. The very thing that had nurtured every creature, collapsing inward into entropy. Why did it happen? There are theories: volcanism, methane spikes, warming currents, shifting chemistry. But the deeper question remains unanswered. What if something or someone disrupted the balance before? Not a volcano. Not a comet. But a force more deliberate. A system. A design. A civilization. Could it be that someone once lived alongside the sea, not just as passenger, but as manipulator? And if so, what did they change? Today, we understand the ocean's breath as circulation. Thermohaline currents. Upwelling. Downwelling. Carbon exchange. But what if someone once understood those systems far more deeply, intimately, not as science, but as structure? Perhaps they built within the sea, not on it. Perhaps they shaped its chemistry for growth, for energy, for communication. Maybe they flourished for a while. And maybe they pushed it just a little too far. The oxygen fell. The feedback loops began. Algae bloomed. Coral dimmed. Fish fled. And the breath that sustained the planet stopped. And when the ocean died, so did they. Not in war. Not in fire. But in stillness. Their cities, if they existed, would now lie in black silt. Crushed by pressure. Eaten by bacteria. Nothing would remain but anomalies in the sediment, traces of isotopes, disrupted layering. Maybe we've already drilled through their ruins, unaware. Even today, we see hints of danger. Dead zones grow where runoff chokes the sea. Coral reefs bleach like pale bones in warm water. The great conveyor belt of currents slows. And the ocean, once a vibrant lung, grows tired again. Could we be repeating a forgotten mistake? If someone once lived in harmony with the sea, perhaps they forgot how quickly it can turn. How a living ocean can become a tomb. And yet, maybe they tried to leave a warning. In certain deep trenches, patterns of manganese nodules suggest unnatural symmetry. In some shelves, ancient thermoclines don't match known climate models. Strange discrepancies in salinity. In oxygen isotopes. All whispers. All almost ignored. The ocean does not leave easy fossils. Pressure reshapes everything. Salt erases structure. But chemistry, that can linger. If someone once lived in water, they may have left their story in elemental ratios. Not a monument. Just a trace. Just enough to say, we were here. And maybe enough to say, be careful. Because when the ocean stops breathing, the planet begins to forget. And yet, if a people once lived and fell beneath the sea, what might they have left behind in glass and sand waiting for the tide to shift again? The glass hidden in the desert floor. In one of the driest places on Earth, there is glass. It glistens in pale green sheets, scattered across the desert like forgotten mirrors. It's not volcanic. It's not from a lightning strike. It's something else, something forged in heat more intense than a forest fire, more sudden than the sun. Libyan desert glass, they call it. Formed over 26 million years ago, they say. Theories point to a meteor, to an atmospheric burst, to something falling from the sky. But still, no crater. No impact site. Just glass. Melted sand stretched into purity by a force that left no clear source. And in the middle of this silent glass field, there is quiet. The kind of quiet that feels curated. Intentioned. What if this wasn't the aftermath of an accident, but of something else? What if it wasn't caused by something falling, but something rising? The ancients wore the glass. Scarabs carved from its center were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, buried against his chest. Even then, they must have sensed its strangeness, a gem formed not in darkness, but in light so blinding it erased everything. Could this be the scar of technology? An experiment? A signal? A mistake? The sand doesn't tell us. But it holds its silence too perfectly. Glass doesn't fossilize thought. But it holds form. Traps bubbles. Encases time. And under magnification, some of this desert glass holds shapes, wave-like ridges, microspheres, complex textures suggestive of blast, of sudden order imposed on chaos. We know what nuclear glass looks like. We've made it. And this looks eerily similar. But that can't be, can it? No one imagines a nuclear civilization before ours. No machines. No reactors. No wires or towers. But if it did exist and it ended, glass would remain. Not plastic. Not paper. Not code. Just glass. Maybe this is all that's left, a signature in silica. An exhale that turns sand to memory. We'd never know who made it. Only that it happened. And that it happened fast. A city turned to wind. A moment turned to stone. The planet doesn't keep many reminders of heat that pure. And yet, here it is. Lying silent in the sand. A trace of something too bright to last. And yet, if such heat left glass in the desert, what else might have been changed, not broken, but melted into the architecture of Earth itself? The canyon that doesn't match the river. There are canyons in the world that don't make sense. Their walls are too steep. Their edges too clean. The river that flows through them is too small to have carved such majesty. It meanders like an afterthought, a visitor in a house it didn't build. We say the river did it anyway. Over millions of years. Water, after all, is patient. It slices stone the way wind shapes dunes, slowly, steadily. But sometimes, the math doesn't work. The Grand Canyon, for instance, a chasm too wide for the trickle that still runs through it. Other canyons in remote places show similar mismatch. The scars are too deep for the streams that barely breathe within them. What if these canyons weren't just natural? Not artificial in the modern sense, not blasted or cut, but shaped, guided, engineered. What if a civilization before ours learned to move water not just for survival, but for memory? To craft the flow of rivers as architecture. To shape the planet's face into meaning. Aqueducts we understand. Irrigation too. But imagine doing it at scale, not across miles, but across ages. A civilization that saw rivers not just as resources, but as veins. That sculpted land for a story no one else could read. And when they vanished, the water remained flowing quietly through cathedrals of stone they left behind. It would be easy to forget their hands were ever there. Nature, after all, erases blueprints. Vegetation reclaims design. But the canyon remembers, even when the river forgets. Some bends are too perfect. Some strata, too fractured at the right points. Like a tool was used. Like the stone obeyed. It's not about proving it. It's about seeing what the earth might still be echoing. Maybe they spoke to rivers the way we speak to glass. With heat. With resonance. With gravity. And maybe their message wasn't meant for us. But the message remains, traced into every winding gorge where the water runs too small and the stone stands too proud. And yet, if the rivers were shaped to speak, could they have been part of something larger, a system not of water, but of salt and preservation? Underscore 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 underscore. The story in the salt. Salt is not just flavor. Not just mineral. It is memory. Salt preserves. It stops rot. It halts time. It turns food into artifact. Flesh into fossil. It is the slow hand of stillness, a mineral pause. And beneath the earth, vast salt beds sleep like forgotten books. Some stretch for hundreds of miles, buried beneath rock, perfectly sealed. Inside them, fragments of life, of cells, of water that hasn't touched air in 250 million years. Deep brine pools, relics of vanished seas, some so toxic, so isolated, they are considered extraterrestrial analogues. But in one chamber, deep and precise, something else was found. A geometric layer. Not sharp. Not mechanical. But deliberate. Crystals arranged in a pattern no known process should produce. Not natural. Not random. It raised quiet questions. And then, like so many strange things, it was set aside. But what if someone long ago learned to use salt not just to flavor or to preserve, but to encode? What if salt was a medium for memory? A vault made of crystal. Because salt doesn't burn. It doesn't rot. It holds its shape through eons. It grows slowly. Patiently. And within its structure, it can trap air, dust, bacteria, ideas. Could a civilization have hidden its story there? Not with symbols. But with arrangements. With structure. With pattern. Like DNA, but mineral. A library etched into the planet's skin. And what if it wasn't meant to be found, until the time was right? Maybe not all knowledge was lost. Maybe some was sealed. Waiting. Salt, after all, is silence. But sometimes silence holds everything. And yet, if information could sleep in salt, might sound itself have been preserved not as code, but as vibration in stone? The forgotten frequency. The world hums. Beneath the noise of wind in city and speech, there is another tone. A low, persistent vibration. Some feel it in their bones. Others sense it in dreams. It moves through mountains. Through oceans. Through us. The Schumann resonance. Schumann resonance, a frequency trapped between Earth's surface and the ionosphere, pulses quietly around 7.83 Hz. It's not loud. But it's always there. A planetary heartbeat. Ancient cultures align structures to it. So we're told. Temples built to resonate. Stones arranged to sing. And now, in isolated caves, some recorders pick up tones that don't belong. Frequencies between frequencies. Not made by wind. Not made by water. Made by, what? We assume nature. But what if this frequency was left behind? A broadcast. A beacon. A memory. Not in words, but in hum. Sound, after all, is shape. It carves. It instructs. It preserves. We use ultrasound to see. We use vibration to clean. Could they, the ones before, have used frequency to remember? To pass a message into the rhythm of the world? Not to be heard, but to be felt. Modern researchers have found correlations between specific frequencies in brain states. Sleep. Awareness. Vision. What if this forgotten frequency was designed not for ears, but for minds? A song meant to awaken something within us. Not knowledge, but memory. Perhaps we have already heard it in dreams, in meditation, in silence we don't know how to describe. Perhaps it is still playing. We build towers now to communicate. But maybe once, they built silence so pure, it carried meaning across time. And yet, if a civilization could speak through silence, might it also disappear by choice, becoming not absent, but invisible? The civilization of one material. What if a civilization never touched stone? Never carved wood? Never shaped metal? Never left behind anything we would recognize? What if they built with one material, something organic, fleeting, ephemeral, and when they were gone, their cities returned to the wind? Imagine a culture that chose impermanence. That saw permanence not as strength, but as burden. A people who shaped their world with fungus, or silk, or resin. Who formed walls from living vines, roofs from moss that grew with them. No bricks. No bones. Just life woven into life. Would we know they were ever here? Or would we walk their ruins thinking we were the first? In Borneo, some bees build nests that echo the geometry of old temples. In coral reefs, certain formations resemble roads. Nature mimics intention, but sometimes, the mimicry may not be one way. What if that ancient people didn't mimic nature, but built alongside it? Not cities separate from the wild, but habitats indistinguishable from it. Gardens that thought. Trees that listened. Pathways made from living mycelium that carried light and memory beneath the soil. Fungi remember. They pass nutrients. They communicate. What if a civilization learned to speak to them? To store their thoughts in the language of decay? And when they were gone, everything returned to silence. We wouldn't find their tools. Their art. Their maps. Only anomalies in soil. Slight differences in pH. A region where the forest grows too perfectly, as if it once knew its role. In the Amazon, satellite imagery reveals lost geometries, lines too straight, circles too perfect, buried beneath canopies older than empire. Perhaps these were not roads, but outlines. Footprints of structures that bloomed, then vanished. To live in one material is to commit to erasure. But maybe that was the point. Maybe they knew that history doesn't need to last. Only to ripple. And we are catching those ripples now. In pollen patterns. In river bends. In the way animals still migrate through landscapes that once held minds. What if they lived not loudly, but wisely? And chose, in the end, to disappear not into dust, but into everything. And yet, if their cities left no walls, could extinction itself be mistaken for evolution, an echo of life reborn into a different shape? The pattern hidden in mass extinctions. Every few million years, life stumbles. Something changes. The air thickens. The seas go quiet. Volcanoes roar, or comets fall, or the earth simply turns the page. Mass extinction. It sounds final. But it's not. Life comes back. Always. Different, but present. It's as though the world exhales, clears the stage, and begins again. And the intervals, they are not entirely random. Roughly every 26 million years, a pattern emerges. Die-offs. Shifts. Strange gaps in biodiversity. As if some unseen clock is ticking. What keeps time on such a scale? Some say it's celestial, our solar system drifting through denser parts of the galaxy. Others say it's Earth's own internal cycle, pressure building, then releasing. But what if the pattern isn't planetary, but cultural? What if mass extinctions sometimes follow civilization, not natural disaster? A species rises, learns, spreads, changes the climate, tips the balance, and the biosphere corrects. We think of ourselves as the first to cause such a tipping point. But maybe we're not. If a civilization before us reached a similar peak, changed the carbon balance, altered ecosystems, expanded too far, maybe they too triggered the system to reset. Not with war, but with overreach. And when the biosphere collapsed, they vanished into it. Like a voice swallowed by silence. Maybe we find no ruins because they didn't have time to leave any. Or maybe they became the extinction. In the fossil record, we sometimes find a layer just a few centimeters thick where everything changes. Below it, diversity. Above it, simplicity. What if that layer is their grave? Not a trace of them as individuals, but a signature of their impact, coded in the sudden absence of life. And yet, extinction is not only an end. It is a gap between stories. Something always returns. Maybe we are not the sequel. Maybe we are the repetition. And yet, if civilizations echo through extinction, could memory itself survive, not in fossils, but in chambers sealed and never opened? The vault with no door. Deep beneath the earth, beyond where light has ever touched, explorers once found a sphere. Perfectly round. Encased in salt. Not a cave. Not a chamber. A vault. It had no entrance. No seams. No inscriptions. Only pressure. Only stillness. We don't know what's inside. Drilling might crack it. Radiation scans return noise. As if it's not solid, but waiting. What kind of vault has no key? No lock? Perhaps it was never meant to be opened. No lock? Perhaps it was never meant to be opened. Or perhaps it already has been, long ago. The earth folds over memory. It seals secrets in magma, in clay, in ice. But this vault, if that's what it is, feels different. Not accidental. not geological. Its surface is too smooth. Its symmetry too clean. Could someone, long before us, have sealed something away not to protect it, but to protect us? What do you store in silence for 1,000,000 years? Knowledge? Disease? History? Maybe it's not a prison. Maybe it's a library. But one that opens only when the time is right. Like a seed that waits for fire. Or maybe it's listening. Measuring the air. The light. The voice of the world. And when the world is ready, it will speak. We're not used to messages we can't read. We dig. We prod. We want answers. But some things are not meant to be hurried. Some knowledge comes on the wind, or not at all. And if this vault is truly a message, then it's not written in our language. It's written in patience. And yet, if the vault was sealed in silence, could something else have been left not beneath, but above, broadcast into the rhythms of the earth itself? The pulse we mistook for weather. We think we know the seasons. Spring comes. Then summer. The air warms. The air cools. The rains fall. We believe this is the Earth's design, guided by orbit, by tilt, by sunlight. But what if some of it is not natural? What if buried within the chaos of climate, there is a signal? A pulse. Some researchers have noticed rhythms they can't explain. Oscillations that don't match solar cycles. Patterns in rainfall and temperature that repeat, but not quite perfectly. As if someone once shaped the weather and the echo still lingers. In mythology, gods controlled the storms. But maybe those stories come from deeper truth. A civilization that understood the atmosphere as system. That nudged wind. That summoned rain. Not with magic, but with math. Could they have stabilized climate, not through control, but through harmony? And when they fell, the system continued for a while, then stuttered. Then fell into disrepair. Maybe we mistake this stutter for chaos. What if climate change isn't entirely new, but a return to natural disorder, after something more precise once held it together? We try now to control weather in small ways, cloud seeding, geoengineering. But what if that's just a rediscovery? A fragment of a forgotten mastery. The earth still breathes. But maybe, once, someone learned to guide that breath. And the pulse remains subtle, fading, almost lost. And yet, if someone once tuned the weather, could they have also spoken in ways we no longer hear, messages made not of language, but of shadow and light? Underscore 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 underscore. The civilization that spoke in shadows. There are petroglyphs that disappear at noon. Symbols that only appear when the sun strikes a rock at just the right angle, on just the right day. Lines that shift into animals, spirals that become maps revealed not by pigment, but by shadow. We call it coincidence. Or cleverness. But what if it was more? What if a civilization once spoke in shadow? Using stone not as canvas, but as lens, guiding light to speak for them. Telling time. Marking stars. Revealing stories only to those who waited, who watched, who understood that not all messages are written, some must be seen. These carvings are not art. They are instruments. Designed to respond to the sky. To bend it. To translate its light into memory. And what they reveal is not static. The message moves as the sun moves. The shadow becomes a verb. A sentence that plays out across minutes. A paragraph cast in darkness. We don't know what they said. The language is lost. But the method remains. We find more examples now across continents. Rocks aligned with solstices. Stones that flash with light once a year. Structures that do nothing except reflect a secret for a few seconds on a single day. Who builds for that? Who waits? Only a people who know that memory is patient. That stories can live not in ink, but in light. We are too fast to see it now. We light everything. We erase shadow. But they watched. They understood that the sun is not just warmth. It is a storyteller. And they taught the earth to whisper back. And yet, if messages were left in light, could they also live in something closer, encoded in us, in our blood, in our very being?